We could feel that something was going wrong. We immediately approached the ship. We were shocked by what we saw. It was impossible for something like this to happen. According to the theory, it all started with the wild ideas of Albert Einstein. Einstein was working on the unified field theory. A version of this field theory suggested that with a large electric generator and energy currents fixed at specific angles, light could be bent around an object, rendering it completely invisible. The USA saw this as an opportunity and provided Einstein with all the resources needed to achieve this. Allegedly, Nikola Tesla was chosen to assist him in this experiment. Thus, two mad scientists were perhaps about to perform a miracle. The US was deeply involved in World War II, and preparations were intensifying. They wanted to transport aid to allies across the Atlantic Ocean and protect their ships. But the Atlantic was like hell for them. German U-boats, submarines, were destroying nearly 2 ships every day, along with their crews. Apart from this, rumors of secret German experiments had become a great mystery, whispering from ear to ear across many nations. Following these reports, the U.S. military forces also began dozens of experiments at the infamous Area 51 to win the war. All of these experiments were named the Rainbow Project. The primary goal of the experiment was simply to stay one step ahead of enemy nations. For instance, in one of those experiments, they created stealth aircraft. Thanks to these magnificent planes, which could not be detected by radar at the time, they gained significant superiority in the war. But, according to the theory, they conducted another incredible experiment, an experiment with catastrophic consequences. The project was called the Philadelphia Experiment. It was a military experiment alleged to have taken place on October 28, 1943. Just like the stealth planes, the idea was to create ships undetectable by the enemy. The U.S. Navy wanted to render its own naval vessels invisible to enemy radar, aiming to gain superiority at sea rather than just on land during the war. Moreover, the goal was not just invisibility, but to teleport the ship from one place to another. But this would be an experiment far beyond the technology of stealth planes, bordering on the impossible. What actually pushed them to do this was the claim that Einstein had conducted a teleportation experiment based on the unified field theory. Einstein had been continuing these studies since 1925. He had done a lot of work on this subject and published his findings in a physics journal. We don't know if he succeeded, but there is someone who thinks he did. A man who announced this experiment to the whole world. Morris Jessup. He held a master's degree in astronomy and was an author and researcher writing about UFOs. In 1950, Jessup received 2 letters from a retired sailor named Carlos Miguel. In the letters, Carlos wrote that he had witnessed a naval vessel being teleported to another dimension, and that Albert Einstein's research was used by the US to teleport a military destroyer. All preparations for the experiment were made, and they were waiting to start. According to the project, the ships would suddenly appear at the desired location without being caught by enemy radar. In scientific terms, optical invisibility. The ship used in the experiment was the USS Eldridge, hull number DE-173, with a crew of 104. It was classified as a destroyer escort. According to an eyewitness, 2 generators with 75 kilowatts of power were mounted under the ship's forward gun turrets. From there, 4 magnetic beams would be projected onto the ship's deck. These refracted beams and radio waves would wrap around the ship, and ultimately, the ship would become invisible to enemy observers. The destroyer USS Eldridge was stationed slightly offshore in front of the Philadelphia Naval Base, and the experiment had begun. On June 22, 1943, at 9 a.m., power was supplied to the generators. A magnetic field began to form. Then, a greenish fog covered the ship, and the USS Eldridge completely vanished from sight. For a moment, I could only see the ship's anchor. Then that disappeared too. There was neither the fog nor the USS Eldridge anymore. We were staring at the empty sea. The high-ranking officers and scientists on our ship were watching this unbelievable achievement with fear, horror, and excitement, holding their breath. The ship and its crew had vanished, both from the radar and from right before our eyes. Everything was proceeding as planned. 15 minutes later, the order was given, and the generator's switches were turned off. At first, nothing happened. Then, the green fog reappeared, and the USS Eldridge began to materialize and emerge again. The ship had irrelevant teleported to the Norfolk Naval Base, 640 kilometers away, and was brought back 15 minutes later. But nothing was the same as before. As the fog dissipated, we could feel that something was wrong. We immediately approached the ship. We were shocked by what we saw. It was impossible. Some of the crew members had been fused into the metal sheets of the ship after the teleportation. It was a gruesome sight. Others never returned at all. Outwardly, the experiment was a success, but because it produced catastrophic results, the studies were terminated. Allegedly, very important names worked on the experiment. We mentioned one of them, Albert Einstein. The others were Dr. John von Neumann and Dr. Nikola Tesla. These were truly significant figures with wild ideas. According to the theory, after the Philadelphia experiment yielded bad results, none of them took responsibility, and they refused to work on it again. About 12 years after the experiment, in 1955, Carlos Miguel sent a letter to Dr. Morris Jessup. This is where it gets interesting. Jessup asked Carlos to send another letter to explain the event in more detail. Then a second letter arrived. In the letter, Carlos wrote that to prove his story, any method could be used on him, including hypnosis and truth serums. 9 years had passed. In April 1959, Jessup called his doctor friend Mason Valentine, telling him that he had reached definitive conclusions about the experiment and asked to meet the next day. They were supposed to meet for dinner on the evening of April 20th, but that dinner never happened. On the night they were to meet, Dr. Jessup was found dead in his car in a park in Miami. According to the police report, he had committed suicide with exhaust gas in his own car, and the notes in question were nowhere to be found. This event inevitably affected the credibility of the entire process. After Dr. Jessup lost his life, Charles Berlitz said in an interview to Valentine, "I think the Philadelphia experiment cannot be explained by known and conventional ways. Some scientists hold the view that the basic structure of the atom consists not of matter particles, but of electromagnetic fields. This is a phenomenon of very complex energy fields interacting with each other. Purposefully creating extraordinary magnetic conditions can change the phase of matter, both physically and vitally. In this case, the time factor, which is not an independent entity, but a part of the matter-time-energy dimension similar to the life we live in, becomes distorted. In short, this experiment is possible. At this point, some questions might come to your mind. For example, why wasn't this experiment done with a smaller ship? Of course, we aren't sure that it wasn't. Those who wanted to teleport a ship might have done this with smaller objects and unmanned vessels first. This experiment was likely the final stage, and because it failed, it was shelved. Furthermore, there could be many reasons why they didn't announce this allegedly failed experiment to anyone. The trust of other countries in the USA, the explanations to be made to the families and circles of the deceased crew, and the US's political and military reputation resulting from a military failure. No country can risk these consequences. However, I must also say that apart from the statements of a few witnesses, there are no documents regarding this experiment. The Naval History Heritage Command stated that there are no records confirming this event, nor any documents showing that the Navy achieved such a success. Unfortunately, even after 80 years, the truth is still unknown. There are claims, but there is no evidence. A death full of mystery and detailed narratives about the event are suspicious. Perhaps one day, the time will come for a top-secret written file to be opened, and the darkness will be illuminated.